Hello and welcome back to another episode of Wuhan Weekly, a podcast that follows the trials and tribulations of 4 Scottish teachers in China. With me today are Ruth Taylor.
Hello.
Tony Ingalls.
Hi.
And Dean McKinnon-Thompson.
Hello.
So this week we are talking everything and anything about relationships in China. But before we do that, we're going to crack on with the news segment that we started last week. So we have 2 very topical news articles that I saw this week, and they are about the sperm banks in China running out of semen. Now this was mainly the problem of the 2-child policy, which got introduced when we were actually here. So do you want to quickly explain what the 2-child policy is?
So in 1949, when the Communist Party took over China and Chairman Mao became the great leader, he basically was told all of the Chinese people that they should go out and they should have loads and loads of children so that they could all make China great, and you could have this huge workforce in China where everyone was able to participate in the communist economy, I guess. And that created a huge problem in terms of how big the population became in China. In the 1970s, they introduced a 1-child policy that meant that if you lived in the city, you could only have 1 child. It wasn't restricted to people who lived in the countryside or people of ethnic minorities. They could still have more than 1 child, but if you lived in the city, you could only have 1 child. And if you had more than 1 child, then you had to pay a fee to the government. And obviously this caused a lot of infringements on the rights of women and meant that it was just, I don't think you should ever restrict the reproductive rights of your population. But anyway, now it's all changed, and you can now have 2 children. The law is different now because obviously the population has decreased.
That seemed to come out of the blue, I think, to a lot of people in the world, probably reading it from outside of China. But as we'll probably talk about in this episode, there are a number of reasons why they did do that.
Yeah, it becomes very apparent especially when you're talking about this kind of stuff, why they had to introduce this kind of policy. So anyway, this article was talking about how essentially sperm banks were just running out of sperm. And the reason why sperm banks are so popular in China is because infertility is extremely high. So the article was saying maybe 12.5% of everybody who is in the reproductive stage, or reproductive age, 12.5% of them people are infertile. And that equates to about 40 million people in China.
That's crazy.
Are infertile. So that's what, 8 times the population of Scotland.
Yeah.
I was reading another article about a Shanghai sperm bank that was urgently needing donors, and if you donated, you would have been gifted a new iPhone 6S. So each successful donation would have been roughly 6,000 kwai in terms of money. So that's £500, £550 back home.
Did they have to give your sperm to the person that wants to use it? Then that person would have a baby, and you got an iPhone, or
no,
you just in a cup and
when
you got an iPhone.
You jizz in the cup, you get an iPhone.
Crazy.
Surely it's only though if it's a viable donation.
Yeah, well that's what I was.
If you're infertile,
and
you donate, then there's no use for it.
What I was going to say is the procedure is very rigorous. You have to go maybe 3 or 4 times in 1 month and donate, and then they test it, and each one of them which is successful, you'll get given, the iPhone 6 or 6,000 kwai.
Right.
Now, talking about semen and jizzing in cups, we can effortlessly transition into our topic, which is about relationships in China. Now, before we go into anything, I just want to make it very clear that we are talking about this from our perspective. This is from, foreigners looking in on China, from things that we hear from co-workers, things that we see in the street. Some of the students we talk to are a bit older and they're starting to date. So we're getting all of our information from this. What?
Some of our students who are a bit older, not grade 1, not grade 2, not grade 3, none of them are dating. No. They have no opinions on this.
But anyway, I just want to make it very clear that this is from, I guess...
Well, this is by no means a rigorous academic study into dating in China, relationships in China, or the Chinese view collectively on relationships. We're just going to talk about what we see and what we think and the conclusions that we have drawn from the opinions of the people that we know.
Yeah. And again, we're not going to talk too much about minorities because we literally know nothing about
Right.
like how dating works there and how marriage works there.
Exactly, and ethnic minorities in China, basically, you know, like we said before, they weren't restricted to the one child or now the 2-child policy before. So they're, you know, the way that they live their life when it comes to love and relationships is going to be totally different. Right. And we are going to stay well clear of that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it would be best to start at talking about traditional relationships and, you know, kind of what it was like, and then we'll talk about how it evolved into the more modern relationships.
Right. Yeah, and I think there are some hallmarks of what made relationships in China in the past, before China opened to the West in 1979, that we can easily identify them with. For example, I think in the past, and I think this can probably be applied to all countries across the world in terms of their like development as like a culture and a society, family was like the most important thing. Men and women inclined to start a family very young, and it was like the most important thing that you could do in life was find your husband or find your wife, find them early, start a family, and provide for your family. And in China, that is amplified even more because family in China is unbelievably important even now. But in the past, as it has been in other countries, you marry young, you have your kids, and that's your life drawn out ahead of you.
Yeah, keeping your family like lineage alive is very important in China. Okay, so how would you find your future husband or your future wife?
Well, in China, like we've said in quite a lot of the past podcasts that we've done, I think we've always emphasized how important family is. And I think there's a lot of kind of like family, parental, like patriarchal influence on who your spouse is going to be, especially because now it's very easy if you're a woman to choose your partner because there are so few men. So 50 years ago, if you were looking for a husband in China, the 3 kind of criteria, the 3 characteristics, according to this podcast I listened to on the BBC, were you had to have a watch, you had to have a bicycle, and you had to have something else. I can't remember what the third one was. And then obviously as this changed, China opened to the West and things became a lot more kind of modernized, the 3 things that you would have wanted, 2 of them, it was like a TV and a fridge.
And a washing machine?
Maybe a washing machine, but I don't know how big washing machines are here, because ours is a piece of shit.
But
so like, I don't know why anyone would get married for a washing machine.
But basically it sort of followed...
Electrical
yeah, like,
appliances.
Right. Technology was becoming more modern, so like that was the thing that you wanted to have.
Yeah, so as technology became more accessible and as China started to produce more, these things were more heavily available. And now, the 3 things that a man should have, your ideal male partner should have, is a degree from a good university, a car, and they should own their own apartment. So the pressure on men especially to achieve and to provide, and for parents of boys and men to save money to provide for them to make sure they can get a wife is incredible. It's crazy.
Right, and I think that also just sort of mirrors the way that China has progressed as a nation and as like an economy, and how that's become even more entrenched in the way people date and the way people marry.
So was there any requirements for women?
The requirement was less on the woman and more on the man in that sense, but I think there were probably some things that men looked for, or that the men's parents looked for, that actually are still applying today. For example, we watched a documentary on Broadly, which is like the women's arm of Vice News, which, I mean, like, I can go into that and why that shouldn't be necessary in like a modern society, but whatever. But anyway, on this documentary, they were talking about how parents take photos and descriptions of their sons and daughters to parks, and they try and like find a husband or a wife for their sons and daughters. And like the things that, you know, they were looking for in other women were like, she needs to be a certain height, and her feet need to be this size, and she needs to, you know, have this color of hair or whatever, you know, like all very superficial things.
Yeah, a lot more aesthetically based.
Right, exactly. Right? Like maybe the things that men need to have are also superficial, but it's more to do with wealth and skills and your potential in life, whereas the sort of requirements women need are appearance and
genetics.
Beauty. Yeah.
Although one thing that the kind of was emphasized on the male description, a lot of these pictures and these descriptions that the mothers had brought of their sons were like, he is this tall, so obviously you don't want to marry a short person. So obviously in China, if you're tall and you're a guy, like that's a big tick in your box.
We'll go into a bit more about this later, because there's this trend of leftover women, and that kind of like stems off that, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what was premarital sex like in traditional relationships?
20, 30 years ago, I suppose, with premarital sex, the social attitude was significantly different. It was taboo. people didn't have sex before marriage.
Right.
Generally speaking.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was very much looked down upon, and, very much more of an emphasis on, commitment to, like, your life partner. And I know that, as we'll go on to say, is still perhaps maybe the case today in certain ways. I think women were shamed if they were looking to have sex before marriage, and in a way that perhaps men weren't. But at the same time, like, I think across the genders in the past, as we're talking about, that people didn't have premarital sex.
So what does that mean in terms of divorce?
Divorce was not, and to some degree is still not, a thing.
Right.
People don't... 20, 30 years ago, people did not divorce. You may not live together, you may have a separation, but you're still married.
Right. I think
legal divorce was not a thing.
Yeah, I think it was virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
Maybe even to the point, like you said there, maybe they would separate, they wouldn't live together, but maybe even in in a more traditional society in the past, in China and probably in other countries in the world, people would just stick it out and, stay together.
For the sake of the kids.
Yeah, right. Even though they didn't want to. For the sake of the kids, for their
their
own
family.
sake, for their parents' sake,
And
for the like honour of their family's sake, maybe.
Saving face. You don't want to be seen as the person who failed in a marriage.
Yeah. In 2014, 3.6 million Chinese couples broke up, and that's double the number it was in 1994. And 3.6 million people in a country of like 1.4 billion. I think there is still a cultural norm now of like, even now, of meeting your partner, being together, getting married 24 and 25 and having a family by the time you're 26 and 27. I still think that happens. I think that maybe you can freely date. You can find your partner a bit more easily. Like, you can go out and meet them however you want to.
Of your own accord.
You can have sex before marriage. But I don't think people live together before they get married. And I think once they get married, it's very much like, this is it. This is forever. That's...
Technology is a factor with that change, I would imagine, with social media and dating apps that are all over the place in China.
Right.
That certainly helps you be more independent and proactive about who you want to find, who you want to date.
Right.
Right,
Which they would not have had 30 years ago.
Right, of
It would
course.
have been completely about family networks, who you knew, blind dates.
In the past, like we said, parents look for their child's spouse in advance. It's almost like an arranged marriage in a sense, They're doing it for their kid.
What is the kind of like attitude towards finding a husband now?
Like we said, things have moved on significantly, and people are starting to be a bit more independent when it comes to love and relationships, and also more open about sex and sexuality.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Like Dean was saying, all the apps, for dating and all that kind of stuff. We've got this one called Tantan. It's like a Tinder clone, so you can like. I don't want to use the word casual because I really don't like that word, but you can meet people on your own accord, and you can like explore, what the city you're in has to offer. And there's also, that sounds awful, doesn't it?
It has to offer in terms of restaurants and nightclubs and women. No.
But you know what I mean? It's a lot more open, and there's also a rise of gay dating apps, which, Dean, you probably know a lot more about than me.
I would say they're a lot more advanced than the ones in the UK.
Like the actual technology.
Yeah, the technology they use to set up the format is much more conducive to being user-friendly and controlling the type of people you meet on it.
Right.
It's not just sort of...
I mean, I've never used a dating app, but like being user friendly must actually be like, obviously, I think the main thing you're looking for in an app is, are there people out there who I can find that I can go and, potentially date, potentially more with? And like, if the app is like user friendly, then it's much easier, right?
I suppose what I'm trying to say is in China, for the gay dating apps that I've been on anyway, there are a lot more criteria options to control and limit who can even see your profile. Which is actually really good, because then you meet the random people that come up and you choose if you want to talk to them.
Not as random as you
Are not as random as you would think.
Right.
Whereas the UK ones, the criteria options are very, very vague.
Playing devil's advocate, though, maybe some people might argue that, that specificity is sort of, I don't know, maybe damaging, or not damaging, wrong word, but less
you don't know.
Exciting, less surprising,
Maybe you don't know exactly what you want, right? So why put...
Well, then don't tick the criteria.
Right, okay, I suppose that's your choice, right?
Also, in a city of Wuhan has 10 million people in it, so you're not going to scroll through tons of people. Maybe it's just necessary. You can have like a loose criteria, and then you can find people, because I don't know, it must be hard to meet people in Wuhan or in any other major Chinese city, given just the sheer volume of people that there are.
Yeah.
I think there's an aspect of fate to every kind of encounter that you have with anyone here, because simply by virtue of how enormous China is and how enormous the cities are.
Yeah, so I'm just going to add to that, like, you've gone from a very tight-knit community of your family, they will help you find your partner, to literally it can be anyone now. Yeah. So good luck. So I guess it's kind of nice to have, as Ruth's saying, it is almost like fate if you meet someone who's like perfect for you, because there's so many people here. Also, the attitudes towards gay and interracial relationships is a lot more open now. But you were saying something about them banning gay media or gay images on Weibo.
They banned, I suppose I'd say, positive media representations of LGBT couples on television and in media generally, which is very regressive and unfortunate. But on the other hand, social attitudes have changed amongst under 35s for the better in quite a significant way over the last 20 years.
Right, I think this is what I was going to say about it. It's not even, like, we're talking here that in modern China, attitudes towards love and sex and relationships are, way more open, way more adventurous, way more like willing to experiment, way more open to the world. But weirdly, on television, on the internet, in the media generally, there seems to still be this weird unsureness. Traditionalism. Mm-hmm. And like you said, like gay depictions or positive gay depictions or LGBT depictions in the media have been banned. And also I think it's not just limited to that. I think, overtly sexual images are banned. I read an article about some singer showed too much cleavage, so her like music video was banned or something like that, and crazy things like that just seem extremely regressive. When at the same time, people in the street, normal people, seem to be a lot more open.
We were out on Friday night and there were girls making out in the bathroom.
Right.
And then you could contrast
Spring
that.
break!
But then you contrast that to then a country that doesn't allow LGBT like depictions of normal relationships on television. It's really odd and it doesn't really add up. But then
it's demographics. I mean, people who are over 55 tend to be much, much more hostile to LGBT related issues generally in China. Whereas if they're under 35, it's completely the flip side.
I mean, that's just how it is in the world.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the difference is the older people in China at the moment are also managing huge change within this country across the board on all the topics. So I suppose there's a natural tendency for them to try and rein things back in.
I mean, it is difficult, trying to control that. Like they have like access to the internet, they're getting like just an influx of information into the. I know you hate the word millennials. They are getting like a sensory overload in terms of like information and what they can and can't do, and what is okay and what is not okay, and all that kind of stuff. But this doesn't just happen in China. I was watching this video on YouTube, and it was about how gay people are depicted in video games. And this guy had gone through like some of the most popular games in the last 10, 20 years. And he tried to, first of all, identify which characters were gay or lesbian. And that was a handful anyway. And when he did find these, there was a common trend. They were either the bad guy or they had some sort of like mental illness attached to them. So, I mean, like, that's how we represent gay people in, like, our community in terms of gaming in the West. And on top of that, some games that had been imported from Japan into America, one of the Paper Mario games, actually, one of the ghosts that kind of, like, helped you throughout the game, she was actually transsexual. Her name was, like, Bob or whatever. Like, obviously it's Japanese, but, like, her name was Bob, but she dressed up as a woman. And there was a few lines of text in it saying, like, oh, I'm a boy really, but I just pretend to be a girl. Hee 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 hee. I guess that's kind of positive, like, because they're, like, normalizing
positive, but still very immature.
Immature. Paper Mario is a PG game, so it's, like, aimed at people who are, like 12 years old.
True. But then why can't there be transsexual depictions in games for 12-year-olds?
And so that gets translated into the American version, and they just remove that completely. So this character is now just a female. There's nothing, about her being a guy.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, I mean, there's stuff like that in the West, but I think this goes for most of the things. Everybody talks about, like, censorship in China and all that kind of stuff, but we in the West have been doing it for a really long time.
Oh, yeah.
And we've gotten really good at it. So we can, like, streamline our media to make it look like it hasn't been censored, but it's been, like, horrendously corrupted by, like, multiple parties.
Right.
I just don't think,
I think you're...
China, I'm not trying to, like, say like anything too profound here or anything like that, but I just don't think they've had enough practice doing it. You know what I mean?
Totally.
To make it look like they haven't done it.
In the UK, it's more unassuming. In China, it's more overt.
I think in the UK, it's not directly the government all the time, but then high-profile figures in the media have very close links to our government, whereas in China, the media is state-controlled. The two don't necessarily not go together totally.
It goes for all examples of inequality, whether it be, you know, depictions of LGBT people in the media or, you know, black people or women. The whole Oscars is racist route and stuff like that. That, in a sense, that's the same sort of thing because people aren't writing roles for black people because there's this like pressure that black people shouldn't be like the main figures, the main heroes in movies and stuff like that. In a sense, that's censorship in a way.
Hollywood isn't representative. Quelle surprise.
I know, right. But I think another example of this that I wanted to bring up was recently there was a scandal in Beijing where a branch of Uniqlo in a Sanlitun area of Beijing, which is a place, quite a wealthy sort of area, a lot of cool bars, a lot of expensive like Western shops, and maybe more wealthy people would go there, a lot of foreigners there too. 2 Chinese people had sex in a changing room and they videoed it and they put it on the internet and it was...
People going mad, were they?
Yeah, and people here were like, whoa, look at this amazing video. Like, they wanted to see it because, like, they don't get to see that kind of thing a lot. And, you know, people here, I read an article recently about how there's been a massive increase in, like, the purchase of sex toys because, you know, people want to do interesting things in the bedroom, you know? And I think this shows that there is a willingness, like a hunger for this kind of thing, but they're being held back by cultural and societal pressures not to.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can't access pornography online here without certain technologies to help you do it.
Right.
So that gives you the dynamic of what's socially, publicly expected and to be seen to be acceptable, and what people are actually doing, which is being much more adventurous with their personal lives. But there's still this sort of halfway house where you don't want to be seen to be doing it.
Do you guys, like we talked earlier about traditional relationships and how before it was, you know, marry young, have your kids, and, you know, like, live your life as a family? Like, do you think now that there are, like this general, like, picture of, like, the family and being in a relationship has changed? Do you think that this is as important now?
Yes, I think it's really important.
Oh, okay.
I think to a lot of Chinese people, they want to please their parents. They want to be like everyone else. There's not a very big culture of difference in China. Everybody is very similar. Everyone likes the same music. It's the way it is because of the unfortunate history that people have had with creative expression, but a lot of people buy into the societal norm. It's the same as anywhere, and I think the pressure to conform here is really, really high, and I think it's not going to change for a while.
Yeah.
But it is changing.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with Ruth. The only thing I would say is there's this now like leniency when you're from like 18 to 27, and you can kind of experiment a little bit, you can look around, but that idea or that thought is always looming over you. Your parents will introduce someone to you if you are not settled by the age of, you know, like 24, 25. They start getting worried. They're like, okay, right, you've had your fun. You need to find someone to marry now and get me a kid. This idea or term of leftover women, where these women, you don't want to be labelled as a woman who's been left over, like, because all your friends have gone off and got a child, and now you're like all dried up and you're like a withered old woman and you'll never find anyone, you know, to marry. And
you're considered like frigid and you know, unwanted. Yeah,
so there was a video that was published in BBC News, I think it was last night, and it was about leftover women, and it's become quite a viral thing in the West. So you probably have heard about this.
There's this really interesting book by a woman called Leta, Leta Hong Fincher, and I think she's American-born Chinese, or she might be Chinese and studied in America. It's not really that important. She wrote a book called Leftover Woman, and essentially a leftover woman is a 27-year-old woman who is unmarried because she's chosen for whatever reason, whether it's to pursue a career or whether it's just because, you know, you haven't met the right person or she hasn't wanted to get married, that, you know, you're termed as leftover. And this comes from a kind of cultural standpoint, but it's kind of perpetrated by the media and by culture in general. But it just means that women aren't given the opportunity to succeed, essentially. That you can either have, there's this choice between, and it's the same everywhere in the world, but I think it's especially profound here, especially considering they have a term for it, where that you have to make this decision between your career and your family. And I know that's a problem in the West or in the UK or in America. I think it's especially prevalent here in the sense that you will be judged by all of society if you aren't married by 27, which is very young. 27 is not old.
No.
It's young to have a family. It's young to be married, in my opinion.
It's young to be regarded as a barren spinster by
Right,
29.
sure.
It really is incredible.
I think what this concept of leftover women really is like a very, very clever publicity stunt to paint women as the reason for some societal problems. You were basically you were referring to there. There are a lot more men here than there are women. I think we were about to say.
Yeah, well, like in 10 years' time, there are going to be 34 million unmarried men in China who have no equivalent female partner to fulfill this kind of traditional relationship goal. So that's 34 million men who will not have a family, who will not grow old with somebody, who will not have children. And so if you have all of these women who aren't married, it makes it very difficult for these men to find a spouse. And so I think that society perpetuates this idea that if you're not married by 27, you're left over in order to ensure that there aren't more than necessary unmarried men in China.
Right. What it is really doing is it's sort of swapping over what the actual truth is by saying that women are left over. It seems as if there is this like surplus of women that are, not
just on a jolly.
Exactly.
Of,
when actually the reality is it's the men who've been left over because for all these myriad reasons, the culture and society has meant that there are all these men that don't have wives, and in order to like get them wives, in order to make sure that they are secure in their relationship at a young age, as the media and society does across the world, they like paint women as being, not only the problem but the holder of the solution, and it's like up to them, to like sort it out.
Yeah,
I think it's very interesting that you're talking about this like patriarchal society, because there's been a couple of articles that have come up on the news recently. There was one about this male teacher who got naked and started fondling a woman, and then this other woman who got almost kidnapped in Beijing. And it's interesting how after these kind of stories there's always helpful hints. If you're a woman, try not to wear
don't wear a short skirt and don't walk home alone.
Try not to wear clothes that make you look provocative, and make sure you don't walk home on your own, where in actual fact they'd be like, right guys, stop fucking fondling people right? And stop trying to steal women from hotels,
right?
And that kind of just reinforces the whole point that like how it's actually the woman's fault that they're not getting married. This is by circumstance that this gender balance has happened. It's not anyone's fault that's alive right now.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just interesting how blame is kind of shifted onto a certain gender because of the society.
It's always that gender though. So and also, never men.
Yeah. It isn't. And also there has to be a solution to this problem. I mean, 34 million very unhappy men who are most likely well educated and middle class in 10 years' time is a huge problem for the government of China.
Yep.
People aren't going to be happy. So there has to be a solution somehow that makes people happy. So that there's no kind of great discontent among a very large population of people.
Right.
And this is probably, sadly, the easiest and maybe the most effective way to deal with that problem.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, I'm almost on the verge of kudos to the people who are doing this now, that they have the foresight to see that this is going to be an issue in the future. It's many years in the future. The thing is, the reason they have this foresight now is because, it's going to affect the power structure. And if people had this foresight about global warming, then maybe shit would be done about it, but because that's not a big issue, then they can't.
Not to be a negative Nancy, but I frankly think it's too late to do anything about it. I think the whole 2-child policy has been, they would have had to have done this 20 years ago. They've left it too late for it to make a difference. There are going to be 30 odd million unmarried men who will never be married.
Yeah.
Because of how late they've left it.
Right. But that's probably why this is all just fallen into place in my brain as we've been talking about it.
Me too.
That's why the government have decided that they're going to ban positive descriptions of LGBT relationships, because that doesn't buy into the traditional family structure in China, but it also normalizing relationships like this, which is, something that is just normalized in my life and beyond contemplation. But normalizing this would make there to be an even bigger problem than there already is.
If it was me making the decisions, sure, I think in my mind the most forward-thinking thing to do would be like to normalize LGBT depictions, because like there must, I reckon, this is a total conjecture on my part, but I reckon there are gay men in China who, you know, feel that pressure so overwhelmingly that they just, you know, ignore their sexuality and they do end up marrying and having families, or they end up being one of these 34 million men who are not going to have a relationship and not going to have a marriage. And if they were just openly gay and allowed to be, then maybe they wouldn't be left, maybe they wouldn't be left over.
There's this app. So you sign up to it as a gay couple or a lesbian couple, and it matches a gay couple with a lesbian couple, so you can get married to the gay, like the gay guy can get married to the lesbian woman,
right.
The other gay guy can get married to the other lesbian woman, just to keep their families happy,
right?
And then if they absolutely have to, they can have a child.
Man,
but it means that they can still live their life with the person that they love while keeping their families happy, which is a major amount of stress, man.
It's the way it is. I mean, the idea of gay rights is such a new thing. I mean, even in the West, 30 years ago in Britain, it was illegal to talk about being gay in school. Section 28. I mean, things have changed so fast. And China, it's even faster. Yeah. And all of this has happened in even shorter space of time. So it's not to excuse horrendous discrimination.
Right.
But I understand why there are teething troubles in dealing with all of these kind of issues.
I think like what we're saying as like a general like overview and a conclusion about this is that whilst there are these progressions when it comes to relationships and sex and love, clearly, as it is the case in many cultures in the world, these things are, you know, still being held over and in some cases perhaps being amplified. Just another very quick example. We were talking about premarital sex earlier and how premarital sex was, you know, very taboo before and now, you know, not so much. There are women now who in China who have premarital sex and they pay thousands of yuan to have their hymens reconstructed so that when they do finally marry, it looks like they didn't have premarital sex. Now, maybe they're having premarital sex, so yeah, this is different, but there's still like this massive stigma attached to it.
It's saving face. It's a big cultural phenomena in China and in the Far East. Yeah. It's a real thing.
But it's like a lot of things that we've spoken about on this podcast where we talk about, you know, traveling or whether it's, you know, just living day-to-day life or education and growing up here. When you take a magnifying glass and you look at a certain population or certain group of people or a certain society, you can pick out apart all these holes. But then when you like move back and you look at the bigger overview and you kind of list these big problems on like a scale that isn't necessarily specific to one place or to one group of people or to one culture, then you realize that these problems affect us as people across the world. And I think it's really easy for us to be like, oh my gosh, China is really, really bad. The government censors everything. People have no choice. People have no rights. Women are expected to stay at home and raise a family and get married at 25. But in the UK, you know, paternity leave was only introduced last year. Being gay as a young person and talking about it at school was illegal. Women, there's a huge gender pay gap in the UK. It's not really that different.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people in British society who would not condone premarital sex and would have some very choice words to say about people who engaged in that.
Okay, so we've been talking about progression in Chinese relationships, in Chinese culture. So the whole idea of dating a foreigner has become not only a lot more accessible, bloody hell, like it's like a new iPhone or something like that, but it's also become a lot more accepted. So I kind of want to talk about it very briefly, and, you know, looking from like our perspective on it, I find it sometimes very difficult to find someone who's quite genuine here, because of, you know, some of like the extremely superficial reasons in my eye why a Chinese girl would get with a Chinese guy, right? So, because we were talking about like the requirements, you know, back in the past, like a bike and a watch and a rake or whatever it was, I can't remember. And then like the requirements now are like a uni degree, a car and an apartment, which is insane. Like we can't even get that back home.
Yeah, right.
You know,
we can't get that here.
But like I feel like there's a lot of like superficial reasons why Chinese girls would date a foreigner, or why Chinese people would date a foreigner. Sorry. Right. So, like, what are the, you know, some of the reasons why?
I think the first and most glaringly obvious one is you're seen as a foreigner in China. They probably think, oh, you've got a lot of money, you're quite wealthy, Even though that's very much not necessarily the case. There are a lot of foreign teachers here, and without talking about our salary, we don't get paid that much. Not really. Not compared to back home. And so we're not really very wealthy. We're comfortable in China though, and so that's very much seen as a wealthiness.
I think a lot of it has to do with Chinese perception of beauty, and because I've never been told that I'm beautiful as many times a week as I get told that here. And that's not me being big-headed, it's just what people say to you when they see you in the street. And if you have big eyes and white skin...
like a small face as well, weirdly.
Yeah. Then you're considered, and like a pointy nose like I have, you're considered to be very beautiful. And so I think that, a lot of Chinese, like there's a big market here for plastic surgery and whitening your skin. And I'm sure we've either talked about that or we will talk about that in the future. And that to me is like...
the main reason.
Yeah, I think so.
Another thing to consider, which I think we would all consider to be superficial, is the obsession with social status here, which is a very real and very pronounced thing. Now, obviously, we have in the UK social status concerns. It's a big driver in who you want to have a relationship with, but it's maximised and multiplied here as a consideration for whatever reason. We could talk about the reasons, but that is a factor. If I am with this guy or this girl, will I be able to buy the Nike trainers for, what was it, 1,000 kwai for a pair of trainers? Something ridiculous. Well, what kind of car will he buy me? That kind of, designer labels. It's an immediate thing, and it's a very real factor. Which is really superficial.
Yeah, it's that, and also, like you said, maybe you buy a car, they'll buy some trainers, whatever. But even to an extent, like, you yourself as the foreigner, you are the Nike trainers, you are the, like, nice car, you are the, like, diamond ring. On their arm,
We have it going out. If you're Chinese, I'm perceiving that if you're a Chinese person, you have a Western boyfriend, white privilege, white skin, it massively enhances your social standing with your friends and with people who see you walking down the street.
You've got that as well, but you've even got like the basic stuff, like since we're white and we don't really speak the language that well, we get away with a lot more than we should.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we can skip the queues because we don't understand what's going on, and we can, like there was once we went to queues, but like once we went to the bank and the bank was closing and we needed to transfer money, but the like our friend Sharon, who's Chinese, she came in, she was like, oh no, we need to transfer money. They're like, no, sorry, we're closed. And then me and Dean walked past and they're like, oh, okay, come in. Right. So it's like something as simple as that.
And like getting a table in a restaurant even. There's this big restaurant called Grandma's Home here. It's really popular. It's bloody huge. There's so many tables there, but it's always full because it's so good. And you have to sometimes wait like 2-3 hours for a table. You rock up as a foreigner, maybe they'll just skip you right to the front of the line.
I mean, Ruth, last time you were there, you went up and just went, Ting Budong, which is like, I don't understand what you're saying to me. So she went up, the girl was like, no. He was like, Ting Budong. She was like, oh, okay, then just ushered us in. And we're like, alright, sweet, that's perfect. Yeah. I mean, and like those kind of things, like, make us out to be like these kind of like superstars, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a bit of money, we kind of like bend the rules here and there when we want to and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, at Helen's on Friday.
We talked about Helen's.
That famous nightclub or bar.
Daniel sent me a text and he was like, and it was just a comment that one of us said, it was like a shipwrecked Hollister.
Well, the famous Helen's, we were there on Friday, and I asked they have these policemen who work as like bouncers there. Anyway, I was like, can you help me? I want a table in Chinese. And
sweet.
Yeah, I know, I learned it in the grade 1, like the grade 1 thing is like, Mom, please help me. And so I was like, yeah. And then so I asked him if he would get us a table, and he went and like found us a table, and there were like heaps of people standing, but he was like, okay. And they kept coming over and trying to talk to me, and I was like, Timbadong.
I'll give you a little bit, not all. Yeah. And also, we were talking about minorities not having a limit, like a family limit. They don't have to apply or appeal for a child and pay like the government money. So we've got like that another superficial.
That applies to us as well.
Oh, if I get with this person, like it doesn't matter about how many children we have because we don't need to pay anything extra.
We're very much talking here about white foreigner privilege. Sure. In Wuhan, there are a lot of people from Africa and the Middle East who study here. And I don't know, obviously, again, because I don't have personal experience from this, but I just know from like the attitudes of some Chinese people who have talked to me about this kind of thing. From one of our friends from Ghana, him speaking to us, when you're black or from the Middle East, you are not treated in this superstar celebrity way necessarily as much as you are when you are like that traditional, like you were talking about, that traditional sense of beauty, the white skin, the pale white skin, you know, the brown sort of like flowing hair, you know, it's not really, exactly, just like Ruth, you know, that is what's considered really, really great. When you're not white, it's not really the same.
My students say to me very regularly, you are Snow White, I like Snow White. And I think Snow White is probably like the ideal of beauty.
Right.
There is one other, I guess, grossly superficial reason why you would date a foreigner, and not that I go out like looking to see Chinese penises, but when I go to the gym, and they are very open about these things, when I go to the gym, I go downstairs to the changing room and I see nothing but bush and little mushrooms coming out of these bushes. Like, they're everywhere, man. You see some guy drying his dick at the vanity mirror. You see some guy slapping himself with a towel, right? And this towel is like an A4 bit of paper. He's slapping himself with this towel, and every whip is making his bell end just like jump off his balls. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not looking for it, but they just like, they lock it to my eyes because it's so strange. Anyway, since I have managed to see my fair few of Chinese penises, they are, I mean, it's like the stereotype of like Chinese guys have small dicks. I mean, right. I haven't seen them up close and personal. Like some of the members here maybe have, but it's a joke anyway. Like it doesn't really matter. Like
right. Of course. Like
I would say I have not personally noticed them being any smaller or larger than any other penis that I have encountered in my life.
In your career.
What are you saying though? Like, are you saying that when
I don't think they're smaller.
No, but like generally, we're talking about this as a superficial reason for a Chinese person to be interested or not interesed in a man or a woman.
The perception they have of us is that we're it's like a.
So what you're saying, Chinese girls, they're what? They're overwhelmed at the thought of a foreign penis, or
I think
you know, there's so many.
Oh Liz, no! That cannot go in the podcast.
There's so much male ego going on right now.
No, but like I think you know.
Okay, so what I was trying to like convey with this like whole knob size thing was, one of the other teachers here, Ed, was telling me about when he was in the office with his co-teachers, and she was reading one of those like self-help women's magazines or whatever it is, where it's like 16 ways to lose weight, but 8 ways to love the skin you're in. And it had an article about like having sex with foreigners, and they said if you like have sex with a foreigner that's white because their penis is bigger, you know, it'll be like the best sex you'll ever have. But it was like a side note, like underneath it, like asterisk or
danger.
Starred. Yeah, danger. Do not have sex with black people because they will like ruin you and put you in hospital or
That's
whatever.
Crazy.
So obviously for us it's just a joke, and I'm sure that like this isn't a real reason,
right?
But, you know,
but it's out there, is what you're saying,
right? So there's like one or two like non-superficial reasons why you would date a foreigner.
Right.
And I guess it goes back to how these millennials, I'm sorry, Tony, have a lot more access to information. They're a lot more aware of what they can and can't do. They know places that they can go and see, that they can go and travel. And the world is like essentially their oyster, especially for some of the middle class people here who have the money to get out and do things. So I think it's very appealing to have someone who would have the same mind frame as you, and especially foreigners coming to China. You know, one of the main reasons why 90% of us come here is because we want to travel, we want to explore all these different cultures. We've already got a strong connection with a large proportion of people who we would be potentially dating. So I think that's maybe another reason why they're drawn to foreigners. Okay, so just to round up dating foreigners, although it's become a lot more accepting, I think there are still, like we were talking about in modern relationships, there are still things that are holding it back. I've got like most of my information just talking to my friends about this, but when people on the outside see a Chinese girl with a foreign guy, there's always that stigma of like, oh, what is she doing? Like, what hideous, heinous things is she doing to keep this foreign guy at her side? But when you like switch the roles and it's like a Chinese guy with a foreign girl, they're like, oh, well done, buddy. You know, you must be really smart and really funny and have like a really good job. So although foreign relationships are a lot more accepting, there are still things that hold it back.
Just to remind everyone, this topic and what we've said about this topic is purely from our own experiences in China. We are not Chinese. We have not experienced what it's like to be in a Chinese family and to pursue relationships with Chinese people within the context of a Chinese family. And we're not trying to be culturally superior. But, we do experience these things in day-to-day life through our friends, through our students, and through ourselves. And we feel the need to share this with you through this podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed it.
I guess what we're trying to say is that this is not some kind of academic study into dating and relationships in China, because we really, like Tony said, aren't Chinese or anything, but it is just what we see and what we've experienced, and it's interesting.
That's us finished for this week. You can get us on many social media platforms. Where can they get us, Tony?
You can find us on Facebook, search for Wuhan Weekly Pod in the search bar and give us a like.
Or you can find us on Twitter at Wuhan Weekly Pod.
You can find us on Instagram at the same handle, at Wuhan Weekly Pod.
You can also fire us an email, questions, suggestions, wuhanweeklypod@gmail.com.
And if you're feeling generous, then you can leave us a review on iTunes. You can just search for Wuhan Weekly in the podcast app.
Sweet, that's us. Bye.
Hello, my name is Dean.